All right, so good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Nicole Wesley. I'm the Director of Career Services, and today I'll be talking to you about resumes. As mentioned earlier, I know that resumes are not very exciting pieces of application material. Students and alumni don't find these exciting. However, they are very important because your resume is what gets you a potential foot in the door for an interview to hopefully land a job. So quickly, what we're going to be talking about during this 45-minute presentation is the purpose of a resume, basic guidelines of resume writing, and resume sections and examples. I did also want to briefly mention before we begin, for those of you that do want additional help with crafting your resume or reviewing your resume, you can schedule a virtual appointment this fall, or we are going to be offering virtual services this spring semester as well. You can self-schedule your own appointment at Calendly. You can also find that link on our website at nsc.edu/career. I do also have an event flyer too. We also in the Career Services Center work a lot with a lot of employers and organizations. We do have one upcoming that's specifically, I would assume, of interest to nursing students. NapCare, they recruit RNs and other healthcare positions for their correctional facilities. So if you're interested in that, I highly suggest taking a picture or a screenshot or reaching out to our office for more information. You can RSVP for that virtual event on Handshake. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Handshake, this is how you access Handshake, and Handshake is our career management platform that all NSC students, you already have an account, whether you know it or not. These are the instructions. You just go to handshake.nsc.edu, you log in with your NSC ID number and NSC password. Once you log in, you have access to research employers and organizations. You can look for current job openings as well as internships and apply directly within Handshake. You can connect with other students and employers that are looking to recruit, career events. There's a lot you can do with Handshake. So if you're interested in learning about that, that's how you can access that. All right, so now we'll talk about resume writing. So the purpose of a resume. With your resume, you should be showcasing your relevant experience, your education, your skill sets, your accomplishments and achievements that qualify you for the specific job that you're applying to. So it should be used as your own personal marketing tool for applying to jobs post-graduation. I know you guys are about to graduate. Congratulations on this being your last semester. I know it's also a very unique time that we're all in, but congratulations to your upcoming graduation. And if you need any help with your job search, also know that Career Services is here to help as well. So I do have at the bottom there, so the purpose of a resume is to obtain a what? I'll just have you guys, I guess, think to yourselves, what do you think the purpose of a resume is? Usually when I go into the classrooms, a lot of times students will say the purpose of a resume is to obtain a job, which that is, I think, the end goal. But really the purpose of a resume is to hopefully attain an interview that will hopefully eventually lead to a job. So again, resume writing, as well as cover letters with your job application materials, is very, very important that you have organized correctly. So I'm gonna talk quickly about some basic tips and guidelines that hopefully you guys are in a computer lab. I know when I've done this with Zara in the past, you guys, that's where you guys are. So feel free to update and edit during this presentation. With your resume, you do want to stick to 11 or 12 point font size and stick to one font style. Your font style shouldn't be anything crazy. It should be something that's very easy to read, like Times New Roman, or Arial, Garamond. Those are common standard fonts that are good to use in resume writing. Obviously, you can increase your font size in your contact header if you want to have your name bigger, or even your headers, your section headers within your resumes. Increasing your size just a little bit, that's okay too, but the majority of your text size should be between 11 and 12 point font. Other general tips and guidelines: anytime you can emphasize text in your resume is a good thing. So emphasis by bolding, italicizing, or doing all caps. You can emphasize text. You don't want to go overboard with emphasizing. Typically, we see emphasis of text by maybe bolding the company name or job title, the name of the institution, Nevada State College. Those are examples of text that you could emphasize. And the reason why emphasis is helpful is because when recruiters, if your application gets hit by a human eye, they initially glance through resumes for about 5 to 10 seconds. So you want to make sure that it's organized accordingly so that it's very quickly for a human eye or a recruiter to quickly glance over and digest. You also want to order your education and experience in reverse chronological order. So what I mean by that is the most recent experiences should be listed first, and then the older experiences last. So for those of you that maybe have an associate's degree from CSN, for example, when you get to your education section, you should be including Nevada State College first, and then your CSN or your associate's degree second, because you're currently an NSC student, you're about to graduate, that should be listed first. You also want to be error-free, so make sure you're checking your grammar and your spelling, excuse me. Make sure you get it double checked. You know, again, schedule an appointment with the Career Services Center or have a friend look over it to make sure that you are error-free in your resume document. And also be consistent in terms of placement. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Additional tips is keeping your resume to about 1 page. You can go on to 2 pages, but here's the thing. Resume writing is not about quantity, it's about quality. So a majority of college students or recent college graduates usually can fit their experiences onto 1 page. Now, if you're really involved, let's say, I don't know, you're part of the SNA club, you've done a lot of volunteer work, you also worked a lot of jobs, maybe you have 5 to 10 years experience for non-traditional age students going on to a 2nd page, or even if you're a traditional age student, but you're very involved and you have a lot of relevant experience that you want to highlight, going on to 2 pages is okay. If you go on to 2 pages and you only have 3 or 4 lines, don't do that. And the reason I say that is because employers don't like it when there's only 3 or 4 lines on the 2nd page. They're like, geez, why couldn't you get this onto to 1 page? So if you are going on to a 2nd page, make sure you're using up about half that 2nd page. But with that said, we always say to keep your resume to about 1 page, definitely no more than 2. Let's say you currently have your resume and you have 2 lines that are going on to a 2nd page. What we advise students is you can manipulate your margins. So to help maximize that white space, I would actually advise, I think 1/2-inch margins are a little too tiny. I would suggest going between 0.6 or 0.7 to 1-inch margins. You can manipulate your margins to maximize that white space. You also don't want to clutter your resume with non-essential information. And also no pronouns in your resume or your cover letter. We see this often. So if you have pronouns in your resume, take a look at it right now, and you want to get rid of those. No I, me, my, there, are, etc. Other tips and guidelines. When, hopefully you guys are using bullet points. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. With your bullet points, you want to start with strong action verbs. So let's say you're a medical scribe working at one of the local hospitals and you're listing out your experiences and accomplishments in bullet format. You want to make sure that those bullets start with strong action verbs. Also, anytime you can use numbers is a good thing. It will help quantify things. It will help paint a better picture to the reader in terms of what you've done. And when you do use numbers in resume writing, you do use the numerical format, which means you don't, if you're going to say 10, don't spell out 10. Use the numerical format 10. Also, in your resume, you should remove everything from high school. You guys are upperclassmen, you're about to graduate. Employers aren't interested in what you did 4+ years ago in high school. They're interested in more so what you've done as a college student during your time here at NSC. Also, for those of you that have work experience that's over 8 to 10 years, you don't need to list everything on your resume, and you shouldn't. So if it's 8 to 10 years old, you want to remove that. The next thing I'll talk about is tailoring your resume. So when you guys are applying, I'm assuming you're going to be applying to multiple job opportunities at the local hospitals and healthcare facilities for RN positions. Even though a number of those job postings will be similar, they're going to be different. And with that said, you want to make sure that you're tailoring your resume. It's very important because when you go online and you apply to the STAR RN program or a new grad RN position at one of the local hospitals, it's going to first hit a computer or an ATS tracking system. And with those ATS tracking systems, a hiring manager is usually telling this computer program, okay, we want somebody that has a BSN, that somebody has experience in A, B, C, and D, and skill sets in A, B, C, and D. And when that hiring manager tells his computer program, this is what we're looking for, that computer program is first sifting through all the applications that are coming through and basically grading your application material. And if your application isn't graded high enough, it might never hit a human eye. So a lot of companies use these ATS tracking systems. NSC is also one of them. I know it's not healthcare related, but we also work with a lot of employers, and companies need those ATS programs because hundreds of people will apply for one job posting. So it's really important to tailor your resume. How do you know how to do that? You want to use keywords from the job posting. You also want to include both spelled out text or abbreviations. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Also, don't use any funky formatting within your resume. So don't use any tables or text boxes. The reason I mention that is because some ATS systems cannot read what's within tables or text boxes. So don't get fancy with formatting. It's not needed. And also, I would advise not to put any text in headers or footers because some ATS systems, if they're older, will not be able to read what's in those header or footers either. So I'm going to show you an example of tailoring your resume, and it's okay if you cannot read this. You don't need to read this. It's not necessary. But pretend you see this document, and let's pretend that this is a job posting for an RN position. What I advise students, and what I even do myself, is I'll print out that job posting or save an electronic copy of it and highlight and circle everything on that job posting that you have experience in. Because in that job posting, that's what they're telling you, this is what we're looking for in a qualified candidate. And make sure that those words or those skill sets are peppered into your resume and or your cover letter. So that's how you can go about tailoring your resume as well as your cover letter. All right, so now we're going to talk about sections of a resume. Some common sections for resume writing is a contact header, education, skills and certifications, experience. There can be very different types of experience. So if you have an experience section, make sure you have a word plopped in front of that. So what I mean by, if you have a section that's listing all of your work experience, make sure your section header says work experience. If you're highlighting your clinicals, make sure it says clinical experience, and so forth. So we're going to talk about a little more in depth with some of these common sections. The first one is the contact header. Your contact header should always include 4 components. And usually those 4 components include your name, your physical address or your mailing address, email address. Your email address should be professional. Make sure it's not livelaughLove@gmail.com. It's something more professional sounding. Usually it incorporates some part of your name, first initial, last name, first name dot last name with some numbers added to it if needed, and your telephone number. So those are the 4 components you definitely need to have. I will mention that because we typically apply to jobs online, a physical address isn't 100% necessary. However, employers are still interested in where you live geographically. So do know that if you don't want to list your full physical address, at the very least, you should be putting city, state of where you live. So Las Vegas, Nevada, Henderson, Nevada. At the very least, you should be putting city, state. Also, for those of you that have a LinkedIn, and if your LinkedIn is updated and you have a customized URL, you could also include that in the contact header. Also, if you wanted, since I know you all are approaching graduation, you can put after your name, BSN. That's an additional option you could include. Where should this information go? Hopefully you guys all know that it should go at the top of the page. So on this next slide, I do have 2 examples of contact headers. I know they might look a little funky because it's on a PowerPoint slide, but I want you to take a look and see if there's one thing that looks a little funky or one thing that you would suggest changing. Specifically in example 1. Hopefully, maybe some of you were looking at, oh, that loves dogs 23 doesn't sound very professional. That's what I was getting at. Again, make sure that you have a professional email address, and that when you are applying, make sure you're checking that email on a daily basis, because if employers are going to offer you an interview, they're going to be either emailing you or calling you. I'll also mention too, make sure you double check your voicemail message. Does your voicemail message sound appropriate? Is that something you would want a potential employer to hear? So double check your voicemail message and make sure that sounds professional too. I also want to briefly mention objective statements. If you have an objective statement, typically objective statements is a very brief sentence that lists who you are and what you're looking for. If you have an objective statement, you need to take that off. Objective statements are outdated. They're no longer of interest to employers. A lot of times when I see students write an objective statement too, it tends to be a lot of fluff, or it doesn't really give too much information that adds to your resume. So if you have an objective statement, please take that off. In place of an objective statement, what you could have is a summary of qualifications. And that's something that you can put at the top of your resume. Again, this is an optional section. You don't have to put a summary of qualifications on your resume if you don't want to. I oftentimes don't see that, and that's okay. But if you want to replace your objective statement, you can replace it with a summary of qualifications, which are short statements that summarize your qualifications as it relates to the position. And here's an example you see below. It should only be a couple bullet points summarizing your qualifications as it relates to the position. Again, that's optional. Majority of students I see do not have an objective statement and they do not have a summary of qualifications. That's totally okay. So we went over the contact header that should go at the top of your resume. We briefly talked about having no objective statement. You could replace that with a summary of qualifications. Typically what I see next for students is the education section. So if you're looking at your resume and you maybe used a resume template and your education's at the bottom of your resume, you want to move that to the top. You guys are current college students. You're about to graduate. It's a huge accomplishment and achievement. Plus, employers want to know if you meet the minimum educational qualifications. So you should keep or put your education section at the top of your resume and keep it there. It's a qualifier to see if you meet the educational requirements for the positions you're applying to. So with the education section, there should also be 4 components: the name of the school, Nevada State College, city and state. We're located in Henderson, not Las Vegas. I just mentioned that because sometimes I see that come up. With states in resume writing, you can abbreviate states. The next thing is the name of your degree. So for you guys, I should have updated this, but it should be Bachelor of Science. You see that at the bottom there, Bachelor of Science in Nursing. You could add in progress because I know you guys are almost there, but you still have a month or so left. So if you're applying to positions right now, you could put in progress. And then when you graduate, obviously you can take that off because then at that point you would have received your BSN upon graduation. The 4th thing you should add is the date or expected date of graduation. So you guys, I'm assuming you're graduating in December 2020. So you would list December 2020. GPA, it's optional. You don't have to include it. But if you do list your GPA, and actually for nursing students, I need to update this, but I would suggest you should only list your GPA if you have a 3.8 or higher. If you do not, that's okay. As I mentioned, GPA is not required. When I was an undergraduate student, I did well academically, but I didn't even put it on my resume because employers are more interested in your work experiences, your relevant, maybe volunteer work, skill sets, your clinicals. They're more interested in that. So long as you have your BSN, They can check a box and say, okay, you meet the educational requirements. Now let's see your relevant work experience and skill sets and see if that aligns to what we're looking for as an employer. All right, so now I'll test you guys again. So this is the top portion of a sample resume. So you have their contact header with their name and their contact information, and the education section. So this individual received an associate's degree as well as working on their BSN at Nevada State College. I want you to quickly look at this and I guess think to yourself, are there any errors that you spot in this sample? There should be 4. Hopefully, maybe you spotted a couple of them. One would include within Nevada State College, what is it missing right there? It's missing city state. So right there, it should say Henderson, comma, NV. Another thing I briefly mentioned is in resume writing, you typically want to spell out, not use abbreviations. So this should be spelled out, Bachelor of Science. And when you spell it out, Bachelor of Science or Associate of Science, it's singular, it's not plural. So Bachelor is singular. In College of Southern Nevada, I circled the date because you want to be consistent in placement. So in Nevada State College, if I'm listing my dates as far off to the right, and that is a guideline I would suggest that you all do, by putting your dates aligned all to the right, it helps balance out your text, and it also helps the reader quickly spot dates. Dates are important. So they're interested in, okay, when did this person graduate? When did they work at this position or volunteer here? Putting your dates all to the right is helpful. The last thing is associates. As I briefly mentioned, it shouldn't be plural. It should be singular. So you should take that S off at the end there. And at the bottom, here's one that should be error-free. Also, here's just another visual of a sample resume to give you an idea. This one is not nursing specific, but you could definitely use this as a guide with the contact header at the top and the education. So after education, what section is next? That depends on your own unique experiences and skill sets. You know, typically there is a work experience section, a clinical experience section you might add, volunteer experience if you're really involved in volunteer work, or maybe you were a leader in the SNA club or other clubs on campus or in your community. So I just have here listed some common sections you could include based off of your own experience. So some sort of experience section will be next. And typically what those experience sections include, oh, I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself, but what is considered experience? So it can be full-time or part-time jobs, it can be volunteer work, it can be your clinical experience, if you were maybe in the Valor program or any other internship or research experience, that's something that you should definitely include. The information you should include with these types of experiences is 4 pieces. And I have there not including clinicals. We'll talk about clinicals later. But let's use the medical scribe example again. So let's say you're a medical scribe at one of the local hospitals. The 4 pieces you would include before listing your bullets would be company name. So maybe you work for Scribe America, the city, state where you're working, Las Vegas, Nevada, your job title, I'm a medical scribe, and the dates of the experience. So as you can see there, if you're currently in that position, you would list your start date, which only includes month and year. You don't need to recall, oh shoot, what was the specific date I started? You don't need to worry about that. You just need to list month and year. Make sure you're also including month. I see a lot of students that use resume templates, and some templates will only list years. You don't want to do that, because with these ATS tracking systems, and even when it hits a human eye, they're wanting to calculate how many months or years experience do you have. And when you only list years, you can't get down to the specifics. So make sure you're including the month and the year. Clinical experience, if you are listing clinicals on your resume, these are things you should be including: the hospital name, city, state, dates of your experience, and unit type. So med-surg, pediatrics, and so forth. Now let's say that you're going to talk about your experiences and responsibilities and accomplishments working as a medical scribe. After you list those 4 components we mentioned, you want to use bullet point format. If your resume currently has many chunks of paragraph without bullet points, I would advise you to update it and use bullet point format. Bullet points is helpful to the reader because it makes things easier to quickly glance over and read instead of having these chunks of mini paragraph text. So make sure you're using bullet points. Each bullet point should start with a strong action verb. If you're currently in your role, make sure you're using present tense verbs. If you're listing an experience that was in the past, it should be past tense. Tailor your skills and experience to the position you're applying to, and making sure to not only list your work tasks, what you should be doing in your role, but also highlight any job accomplishments or achievements that you've done during your time there. And job accomplishments and achievements can range from did you help make the company or that work environment better by helping anything to do with costs, if you've helped cut costs, or if you've helped increase sales, if you created a better system or a better way of doing things. Those are just some vague ideas of job accomplishments or achievements. The other thing with your bullet points is you want to be concise, but also provide enough detail. And on this next slide is talking about developing your bullet points. Now, this is something we often see with students that they could do a little better work in. It is totally okay, and you should be developing your bullet points, giving a little more context so that when a human eye or a recruiter is reading your resume, they have a better, clear picture of what you've done in your current or past experiences. So if you have very short bullet points that are maybe 3 or 4 words, long, that's not enticing to the reader. That doesn't give a full picture of what you've done. You want to develop your bullet points. So if you have, for that first example, identified patient needs, you can develop your bullet point by asking yourself, well, how or what were these patient needs? For whom? Was it a certain age group of patients? Why was I doing this? What for? By answering those questions, you can add a little more context and therefore provide more information to the reader. I'll also mention that red text at the bottom, it is definitely okay for your bullet points to go on to 2 lines. And sometimes when I say that, students, like, they're surprised by that. That is totally okay. If you go on to a third line of text with a bullet point, that's too much. That's when you're providing too much information. You should only go on to a maximum of 2 lines of text per bullet point. So again, here's another example. So let's say you're listing your clinical experience and you worked in the PEDS unit at Desert Springs Hospital. I'll give you guys a brief couple seconds to see if there's any errors you can spot in this experience example. So hopefully maybe you saw that the city state is missing. I just emphasize that. I see that often where students forget that. I'll also mention briefly, if you're using a resume template, I would be cautious of resume templates. Resume templates, number one, you don't know who's created these resume templates. A lot of times students will find something and be like, oh, this looks nice. I'm gonna pick this template. I'm just gonna input this information and then I'll have a resume. But what I see with templates is that oftentimes templates put things on resumes that shouldn't be, and they oftentimes will forget to include things on resume templates as well. Sometimes I see that they forget to put city state. So I would highly be cautious of templates. Templates also come along with funky formatting issues. So when I'm helping assist a student with reviewing their resume and they have a resume template and we're trying to maybe move all their dates to the right, it's tough to do because they already have set formatting structures. So I would advise, if you're having issues, you can schedule an appointment with our office, or I would suggest recreating your resume from scratch if possible. Next error on here, June. Any ideas of why I have June highlighted or circled? It's because it's missing the year, right? I mean, I would assume it's June 2016, but you don't want the reader to assume things. So again, for dates, you should be putting month, year to month, year. Also, 16 is circled because that should be just 1/6. Assist, remember back to verb tense because this is a past experience. This should be assisted. Add the ed at the end. Here's an example that should be error-free. So there's multiple ways for those of you that have clinical experiences. Number one, I want to mention that you do not need to list clinicals on your resume. It's not required. For those of you that have a lot of relevant experience outside of your clinicals, I would advise that you do not need to list your clinical experience. If you're an EMT or a medical scribe, or you were part of the Valor program, those type of things are going to make you more unique than any other nursing student or nursing grad. And those things I would advise you to take up more space on your resume and highlight those things. All nursing students go through a similar type of clinicals. So that's why I'm saying it's not required for you to list your clinical experience on your resume. However, for those of you, if you want to include it, there are some ways you can do that. So this is one option. Let's say for some of you, you've gotten a lot of your relevant healthcare, nursing related experience through your clinicals. You can dedicate more space by adding bullet points. and dedicating more space on your resume to highlight not all of your clinicals. I realize you guys go through a lot of clinicals, but highlight maybe you're interested in med-surg, and you're highlighting your med-surg clinicals. Or maybe you've done a couple clinicals at Sunrise Hospital, and that's where you really want to end up getting your first job. So maybe highlighting a few of your clinicals at Sunrise. So this is one option if you choose to list your clinical experience. A second option, which doesn't have as much, it doesn't dedicate as much space on your resume, and typically this is what I see if you list clinical experience. You're listing, you're giving one line per clinical experience that you want to highlight. And these are two different examples, as you see here. So if you do choose to list clinicals, those are two different options you could use to list on your resume. I typically see this option too. Also, I guess I'll go back to, if you do list your clinical experience, I usually see that coming after your education towards the top of your resume. So you'll have your contact header, education, clinical experience. Then next section typically is some sort of work experience. If you don't list your clinicals, that's also okay too. You can use the rest of your resume space to highlight your relevant work or volunteer or leadership positions that you have. When listing out work experience, here's some examples, and this should be error-free. I will pause and mention here, I do realize that for some students, you might have a lot of work experience, and maybe you only have one or two experiences that you feel like are relevant to nursing or healthcare. And then the other experiences are not as relevant. I definitely encourage you to list both your relevant and not as relevant experiences, but you can also break that up. So if you notice on this slide, it says relevant work experience at the top. So let's say the student listed their relevant work experience, but they also worked at Target as a sales associate, and they also worked at a hostess at Red Lobster. They can also list their experience at Target and Red Lobster, but they can include that in a separate section that goes after their relevant work experience section. And that section header can be titled additional work experience. By doing that, you're going to highlight your more relevant experiences towards the top of your resume. That's a goal in resume writing. You want to highlight your most relevant experiences towards the top of your resume. For those of you that have a lot of volunteer experience, here's an example of how you can list your volunteer work. As you see, the dates are on the right, as we advise. All of the bullet points are starting with strong action verbs. Another helpful section specifically for nursing students is having a skills section or a skills and certification section. When you're listing your skills section, make sure you're including only hard technical skills. Do not list people skills. Do not say you have good organizational skills or good time management. People skills do not go in a skills section in resume writing because skills refer to hard technical skills. If you want to highlight that you have good organizational skills or good teamwork, plop it into a bullet point in an experience where you've demonstrated your organizational skills or your teamwork skills or time management or whatever you want to highlight. Also, you can include certifications. So if you have your BLS or ACLS or you're an EMT, those are things that you can definitely highlight within a skills section or skills and certification section. You can also list or include expiration dates and the certified body. Obviously, I know you guys aren't registered nurses yet, so you can disregard that first bullet point, but if you wanted, you can include, if you've scheduled your NCLEX, you could include when that date is pending and when you applied for it. But also know that that's not 100% necessary either. Typically, I see in a skills section listing some of your certifications like BLS, CPR, things like that. If you are bilingual, that's something that definitely I would advise putting as well in a skills section. So other sections you could include are what you see on the screen. Extracurricular activities, so if you're involved in clubs and organizations, volunteer experience, leadership experience, and so forth. As I briefly mentioned a couple slides ago, on that last bullet point, experience, you can break up your work experience or experience in general, where you're breaking it into two sections, where you're breaking it into, okay, I'm going to plop all my relevant nursing, healthcare related experience and put that all in one section. And then after that section, I'm going to have another section that's additional experience and list my additional experiences that are still good to highlight, but might not be as relevant to the field. The example I think I gave earlier was working at Target or Red Lobster. And lastly, I just have a couple resume do's and a resume do nots. So the first one I'll start off with is resumes do not. Do not put references available upon request. Again, I see those typically with resume templates. If you have that at the bottom of your resume, delete it. And you just now have more space to maybe add another bullet point or two to an experience you have. Also, don't list any references on your resume. References go on a completely separate page. Your resume is your own marketing tool, highlighting your own experiences, education, and skill sets. And also do not list supervisors' names or phones or reason why you left. Let's say you were a medical scribe. You don't have to list that Sally Sue was your supervisor and her name and contact information. That's something you don't put on a resume. That's something that you would put on a reference page if you had her listed as a reference, but not something you put on a resume. I also advise with resume writing, employers, as well as these ATS systems that we talked about earlier, they do not care about the prettiness of your resume. They care about the content and if it's organized appropriately, if it's free of errors. So I would also advise that do not include color, graphics. Definitely don't include a picture of yourself. Employers do not need to know how you look. That has nothing to do with whether or not you have the right skill sets or experience or passion to be a good RN. I've heard some employers and companies that if you have a picture on your application material, they disregard you. If you do have color on your resume, I think a little color is okay. But the majority of your resume should be black and white. Now, if I was talking to graphic design students or marketing students, that would be a little different, but because I'm talking to nursing students, your resume should look black and white. Get rid of that objective statement and don't use a resume template. Resume do's, do add your relevant certifications or hard technical skills. Do highlight any relevant service or healthcare experiences that you have. If you don't have a lot of work experience, do know that employers love to see students and recent grads that have great volunteer experience or leadership experience too. So think of those things as well. Do tailor your resume to each job you apply for and make sure you're using those keywords. And then also make sure you're following the instructions on the job posting and application. So making sure you're applying by the deadline. Maybe in the job posting it asks that they want you to give them 3 reference names. If they're asking for 3, make sure you only give them 3. Don't give them 4, don't give them 5. I've also heard of employers that will disqualify candidates because they're not following the instructions on the job posting. So, all right. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will take I have a couple minutes for questions.